Almost 100 years ago, Leadbeater's possum was actually declared extinct. Fortunately, at that time, in 1921, they'd got it wrong. And 40 years later, Leadbeater's possum was rediscovered up near Marysville in the Central Highlands of Victoria. The reason it was thought to be extinct in 1921 was because all the forests in which they were known to exist in the Bass River area of West Gippsland had been cleared. And this illustrates the point that Peter mentioned in the film and others have mentioned this evening. It's the loss of habitat that is driving species into extinction. Competition with our species. We're robbing them of habitat. And if we are going to live in a world that has the extraordinary and wonderful diversity of wildlife, we've got to reverse that. In 2004, Friends of Leadbeater's Possum was formed by a Healesville local, Sarah Blair, who had worked with Professor David Lindemeyer of ANU and learned about the Leadbeater's possum. And she was actually inspired by the Friends of the Helmeted Honeyeater and the extraordinary work they were doing for our state's faunal bird emblem, and started the Friends of Leadbeater's Possum. One of the first things she did was to intercede with John Thwaites, then the Minister for Environment, at the state level, to reintroduce the recovery team and try and get work happening to recover the species at a local level. And over the years, we've worked with government, we've worked with various agencies, including Zoos Victoria and Parks Victoria. We worked with Dr. Dan Harley, who's with us this evening, to get Leadbeater's possum recognised as now being critically endangered, not just endangered, critically endangered, the last step before extinction. And yet we are still logging this species' habitat, the ash forest of the Central Highlands of Victoria, and most of the trees are pulped and turned into cheap photocopy paper, sold as reflex in supermarkets and post offices across Australia. We're losing a special and unique species, the state's faunal emblem, the only mammal that exists only in Victoria and nowhere else, for cheap photocopy paper. We have worked with government to try to do something about this for the last 15 years, but now we are facing the end game. In the next 5 years, maybe 10 years if we're lucky, and if there's not another fire, we are going to see Leadbeater's possum go beyond the point of recovery. So Friends of Leadbeater's Possum now is actually taking the industry to court. And we have run a case in the federal court. It was supposed to open actually this Monday, and I didn't think I'd be able to be here this evening because of it, but it's been adjourned to open hearing on the 3rd of June. And this court case is a really big court case. It's actually challenging the industry's access to these forests under what's called a regional forest agreement, which is an agreement between the state and federal government by which the federal government basically says that if the state allows this logging to go on in threatened species habitat, the federal government agrees not to interfere. And we are challenging that in the federal court. We've worked really hard on this case for about 18 months. It's a really good, strong case, so much so that the federal and state governments both applied to intervene in the early stages of the case. The case is based on an enormous amount of work by volunteers, particularly those of Wildlife of the Central Highlands, or WATCH, who go out and survey in the forests for these threatened species. But their work, because they are lay witnesses, has to be verified by experts. And so the evidence we actually provide to the court will rely very, very heavily on the work and opinions of a series of expert witnesses. And we've got the best minds in the country working on this case. They've been out into the forest, they've examined the sites that we're talking about, they've provided written reports. Some of them have worked for nothing, others have worked for mates rates, but we have to pay them because we have to show the court that they are independent. They are not biased witnesses doing it because they're just greenies. They are independent witnesses who are using their expertise to support our case. And it's that support that we need to raise funds for now. Probably around $60,000. We haven't got all the accounts in yet, of which about 2/3 has already been paid. So we're seeking to raise around $20,000 to support the work of these expert witnesses and their costs when they come to appear in court in support of our court case. So through this court case, we will be challenging the logging industry in our local forests, but it has national impacts because there are 10 RFAs across the country. If we're successful in this court case, we will actually be challenging native forest logging across Australia. It's that important.
Yes.
Okay.